Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and we're back with the first video after we hit 1,000 subscribers. And while we're not quite partnered on YouTube yet, we've passed a lot of the checks. We just need them to verify that the account is monetizable or not. We will be essentially an official YouTube channel, an official YouTube partner. And as much as that really means with 1,000 subscribers, I still want to thank all of you for everything you've put in to help make this channel, all the wonderful comments I've gotten so far. It's been amazing, and it makes me feel like we can really go the distance. So, in light of all this, I'm not going to plug the channel this time around, but, you probably know the shtick by this point. Let's go ahead and talk about the Chronoskimmer. The Chronoskimmer is an interesting archetype, to say the least. It is generalized time manipulation that can be used for any style of character. Granted, I'm sure a lot of what the Chronoskimmer is about was mostly directed towards martial characters, especially because the Time Mage is directed specifically at casters. But the Chronoskimmer has no requirements, really, no prerequisites, nothing. It's just a rare archetype dedication. Now, the biggest reason for this, I can imagine, is one, there are actually some strong abilities in the Chronoskimmer. Not gonna lie, they really mess with how certain functions of the game work, and I think it's an overall strong archetype. But I think the biggest part of it is maybe continuity, in a sense. There is no, as I said in the prior video, despite what some of the lore bits and some of the backgrounds may say, there's actually no going back in time as far as what abilities characters have access to. Nothing in this game allows you to go back in time to retry events or anything like that. Not only would that be annoying for everyone at the table, really, but that just wouldn't be balanced. But one of the things that the Chronoskimmer does is essentially go back in time to retry checks a lot. And the Chronoskimmer can kind of bypass a lot of checks with their abilities. But let's dive into the dedication itself, and you'll see what I mean. So the dedication itself is interesting, to say the least. It gives you access to essentially the ability to determine your own initiative. So you have three choices. You can either do initiative as normal, you can stabilize your timeline to do 10 plus your initiative modifier, so essentially the average roll, or you can destabilize your timeline to allow you to make a DC 11 flat check, and if you succeed the check, you get an initiative modifier of 19, or, well, your initiative becomes 19 plus your initiative modifier. If you fail the check, it's 1 plus your initiative modifier, which isn't good and will probably make you go last, as the former would make you go first, more than likely. This is genuinely a powerful effect. It can almost guarantee you're going to go first or last in initiative. And even 10 plus initiative mod, that honestly is about the average. Technically I guess the average is 11 plus, but you know what I mean. It's still pretty good. But overall, not a very strong dedication feat overall. Initiative is important, but not so important that I would take a whole feat just to do something like this. But you get access to the Chronoskimmer's other feats, which I think is very worth it. And something that I really like about them, and let me quote it here word for word. The DCs for these abilities is either your class DC or spell DC, whichever is higher, and is called your Chronoskimmer DC. I like this line because nowhere else in the Dark Archive yet, at least, I haven't done the last two archetype dedications yet, do you see the fact that they just say this will now be referred to as the Chronoskimmer or whatever archetype DC. I don't know why no one else did this. A lot of the archetypes do use highest of spell DC or class DC. And this just makes sense. This just makes it easier so you don't have to say, this uses the higher blah, 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 blah. You can say, this uses your Chronoskimmer or whatever archetype DC. I think it's a really good wording on this. And overall, the initial dedication feat is okay, but the rest of the feats are why we're here. Turn Back the Clock is the first feat you get to pick up, and it's a really good one. You can, as a reaction to failing a saving throw or skill check, you can essentially re-roll the check again and get a +1 circumstance bonus to the check, as essentially you're going back in time, learning from your mistakes, and trying to do better on the second time. It's overall a really strong ability. Now, you can only use it once per day, so not the strongest, but the fact that you get a retry check and add a circumstance bonus is good. Now, this is a fortune effect, but you do not get to pick the better of your... Actually, is this a fortune effect? It is not a fortune effect. Okay, that makes sense. So it's not a fortune effect. And that's because whatever your second roll is, you keep no matter what. So if you botch it on the second roll, you're kind of SOL, which makes this kind of a more timid feat, honestly. But it's a good feat when in addition to some of the other feats that we'll see a little bit later on. Guide the Timeline is an incredibly powerful effect. Now, what it does is for one action, you pick an ally or an enemy, and then you mess with their timeline, nudging it towards a desired outcome. If you pick an ally, the next, what is it? It's the next attack roll or skill check they roll. They roll twice, and they take the better of the effect, which is a fortune effect. If it's an enemy, it's the opposite. And for their next skill check and or attack roll, they roll twice and take the worst of the two, and it's a misfortune effect. Now, for the enemy, they do get to make a will save against your Chronoskimmer DC, which is okay. And then it doesn't matter what, the target becomes immune for 24 hours. Now, you might be asking, this can only be used once per day. That seems like a redundant line. It is a redundant line for now, but there's feats later that I'll add to this. The Chronoskimmer builds up to something really awesome, and a lot of these feats are really strong. The ability to give your ally advantage on an attack roll is immense. I've been playing a Magus recently in a game run by my fiance, and my character hits like a bus. Giving me advantage, giving me, the better of two rolls is really strong, and it makes me more likely to crit and do a ton of damage. So from that experience alone, I know how powerful this effect is. And the same goes for the misfortune effect applied to an enemy creature. That can be devastating for sure, but we got more great feats coming up, so just hold on because you'll see what I'm talking about here shortly. Reversing Charge is an interesting ability. It's 2 actions, and it allows you to stride, and if you end adjacent to an enemy, you can then strike that enemy, and then you teleport back to where you started. This is the classic time rewind kind of ability you see in games like Overwatch and a lot of other things. It's a really interesting ability, and it's a good way to avoid dealing with a creature that is quite a nuisance. Not only that, but this allows you to kind of better keep spacing between you and an enemy, and it has some interesting things. It does say you teleport back, and I mean, I would rule it that you actually teleport back, meaning that you don't provoke any attacks of opportunity. Makes sense. It doesn't say that this movement gets the teleportation trait, though. So, rules as written wise, it's vague, to say the least. Teleport back, I would rule, and probably will, that you just teleport back. It doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity. You just go from your space back to where you were before. It's a good ability. It's ability that's really good for skirmishers or for just dealing with enemies that hurt you at the beginning of their turn or what have you. There might be also a variety of other times that this might be useful. This is a utility combat skill. You use it in certain circumstances. It's not going to be always the best choice, especially because you're using 2 actions to essentially stride, strike, stride. But, I mean, I can see how this can be really efficient and really effective overall. So, I would say, more than anything, this is a pretty good feat because it can give you more versatility in your combat. And for a lot of martial characters, having more things to do in combat is only a good thing. Superimposed time duplicates is a very fascinating one, and it's a very good action overall. Now, you can only use this once per hour, but for an action, you superimpose yourself from a different timeline, either your current timeline even, or a past timeline. It doesn't really matter. Overall, what the effect does is you are considered flanking an enemy with yourself. Now, this doesn't inherently make the enemy flat-footed. You flank the enemy, which makes them flat-footed. That means that if the enemy has anything like deny advantage or anything that prevents them from being flanked, they actually don't get they don't get flat-footed from the use of this ability. It's overall pretty good, and the writing here is great. I love how they added that in, forcing it to be a flat-footed situation by flanking so that there's no confusion when this could apply. It could be something very, very messy if a player says it makes a creature flat-footed, and the DM has to argue that semantically it says that, you know, you're flanking a creature. No, it says right here it's flanking, and it doesn't apply to those two effects. And I believe you're flanking until the start of your next turn. Yes, until the start of your next turn, you're considered flanking the creature, which is actually good because it doesn't mean it's directionally based. It doesn't actually have a duplicate there. The other form of it is flickering there. If you have attack of opportunity, even enemies that are not where your duplicate were would technically get flanked by you when you strike them in this way. It's a very good ability, and one of the reasons why I think the Chronoskimmer is marked as a rare archetype dedication. Unlike other ones from Dark Archive that are more roleplay based or give the GM more work, this archetype dedication allows you to get a lot of really good effects. A lot of very strong combat-orientated effects, I have to add. Borrow Time is another fascinating ability, and I absolutely love it. You can only use it once per minute, or once per minute. So this is pretty much a once per combat ability, but it's really strong. As a free action when your turn begins, you can steal one of the actions from your next turn, making you essentially quickened where you can stride step or strike. And I don't actually think you do become quickened. Okay, good. Good that they mentioned that. What does happen, though, is after your turn ends, you become slowed 1, and then at the beginning of your next turn, obviously, you'll lose an action to that slowed 1. You're essentially transposing an action from one turn to this turn, and I love it. It has a lot of great abilities, and not only that, but if you're getting towards the end of the combat, the boss is probably not going to survive around. You can probably tell this is a great action to pick up overall, just to give you more to do. Make an extra attack, give you some more value. There's really no downsides as long as this ability is used accurately. Now, you could also use this first round of combat, have a good start, and then the next round, just use a 2-action ability like a spell. For Maguses, this is great because at the beginning of the combat, you could run up to an enemy with this quickened action, get into or spell strike, and then use your arcane cascade. And then on your next turn, you can just cast a spell. There's many Magus spells that can be used up in combat, or, you know, a wide variety of other things. You could use a hybrid spell and still strike and get your spell strike back overall. This works really good for something like the Magus or other classes that have a very tight kind of action-based class. You know, their actions are a lot more limited because they work around 2-action abilities all the time. So I actually really, really like Borrow Time. Steal Time is another great action. For 2 actions, you can essentially slow a creature within 30 feet of you. You pick a creature, and they have to make a Fortitude save against your Chronoskimmer DC. The creature is then gets the same effect as the slowed condition. Slowed 1, if I'm not mistaken. No, the effects of the slow spell. So this works like a spell, but without actually a spell action, which is very interesting. This is really good because essentially this allows you once per hour to cast a slow spell as a martial character without provoking attacks of opportunity because you don't cast slow. This action here doesn't have a trait like manipulate or anything. You just can cast slow without provoking attacks of opportunity once per hour. That's ridiculously strong. Now, it is a fortitude save against the enemies, or against your Chronoskimmer DC. Now, for martial characters, the Chronoskimmer DC is not going to be that high. But even failing, or even if they succeed the check against slow, they still get slowed 1 on their next turn. So this is overall a really good ability. Though you are trading 2 actions to remove one of theirs, which could be potentially good if it's a very powerful enemy. Just something you have to keep in mind. But other than that, this action, and like many of that we've talked about before, is why the Chronoskimmer is rare. It is a very powerful archetype dedication. So yeah, but we got some more fun feats coming up. Combat premonition is really good. So you know that whole destabilize, stabilize timeline thing that you get with the archetype dedication itself? Well, now you can spread the love, and you can make it better, because you can choose 2 allies when combat starts, and you can give them a fortune effect that makes them roll their initiative twice, taking the better result. In exchange, you get a misfortune effect to remove, or to roll twice and take the worse effect. This is good overall, and then there's some other wording here that, if someone doesn't receive the benefits of this, like if an ally somehow doesn't get their extra roll, or your misfortune gets canceled, obviously then this just does nothing and no one gets any benefits from it. So it can be pretty easily interrupted. Easy is not a great way to put it. There are ways to interrupt this that exist in the game. I wouldn't say they're very common, but there are ways that you can interrupt this. But giving 2 allies advantage and getting disadvantage, if you're a reaction-based character like a champion, this is a good opportunity to let your allies kind of get into position, and you can still do things up until your turn comes up. So being at disadvantage is not necessarily a bad thing, and your group gets a net advantage on one of their initiative rolls overall. And this could be really good, especially if you have very strong teammates. Escape timeline is interesting. So it's a free action that you can use once per day at the beginning of your turn. You phase out of time. Your turn ends immediately, but you can no longer be targeted or affected by anything pretty much, and you don't even go to like the ethereal plane. Let me double check that here real quick. Yeah, no, you just stop existing in the moment. And while you can't do anything, no one can really do anything to you. Now, any effects like flat checks or conditions like persistent damage occur, and you do still need to make the flat check to get rid of it, but you don't take damage from it. Now, you do take anything that doesn't do damage to it. Like if you're frightened, for instance, when you use this, your frightened condition goes down at the end of your turn, and it doesn't just get halted until the next turn. So there's a variety of things that can, be useful with this. Overall, this is really good if you're in a bad situation. You got 1 hit point left. You don't know if you can take another shot. You don't want to risk it. You phase out reality, let your team hopefully get in, try to get aggro off, beat the boss, or if, anything, get the healer up to you so that they can heal you when you come up. But, this is a solid ability overall, and it's once per day. So, it has a good effect. It's not as good as some of the other Chronoskimmer abilities, but I do really, really like this one. Spacetime Shift is really good. It's a really solid ability. So it's a free action you can use once per 10 minutes, which is essentially once per battle, given the situation. But what it does is it augments your strides for that round. Every time you would stride, you teleport to a location that you could have reached with your stride. And the movement does get the teleportation trait, which is very important to know. Not only this, but you do not provoke any attacks of opportunity or any actions based on movement. So this is a really good ability to get through a battlefield, to get to a situation, or to get into a place that would normally be very difficult to get to. I like this one overall. Teleportation is very good, and there's a large variety of ways that this can be used. Now, this only augments strides. It does not augment other types of movement like steps, but it does augment things like flying, burrowing, whatever kind of speeds you have. So overall, this is a very strong ability for getting around certain enemies, getting into the back line or getting out of dodge in you know, probably one of the best ways possible. And yeah, I really don't got much more to say I really don't got much more to say about this one. So let's continue. All right, we come to the ultimate Chronoskimmer skill, and it's called Reset the Past, right? Yeah, Reset the Past. It's a free action that you can take once per day, and it just resets one of your other Chronoskimmer abilities that have a cooldown more or less of 24 hours or less. And this is what makes Chronoskimmer really broken, because a lot of these abilities are really good. They're balanced by the fact that you can at most only do these maybe twice in a combat if it runs long enough. And realistically, most of these abilities you only use once in a combat. And the per day abilities, whew, those are really, really good. And this ability right here just allows you to reset any of them. Now, they do have to be Chronoskimmer abilities. They can be abilities from your class or anything else like that. But still, this is really good. It gives you a lot of flexibility, especially at this point in the Archetype dedication. And you can get some really strong effects. And this kind of pushes the Chronoskimmer into the not broken, but very powerful Archetype category. Similar to how Archer is very powerful because it's one of the few archetypes that actually give you a bonus to an attack in some way, or at least a really good one, a +2, rather than the +1s that other archetypes could give you. This allows you to get some of the other benefits that we priorly mentioned again. And that could be very good, very broken in some situations. And it's probably one of the reasons why Chronoskimmer is marked as rare. A lot of their abilities are really strong. I would allow a Chronoskimmer in my game. I wouldn't be too worried about it breaking the game in any form or fashion. Honestly, the rare tag is predominantly because your character is actually messing with time. And there's a lot of going back in time things with this archetype, which could, make some GMs a little uncomfortable. But overall, the abilities are good, but not broken or scary. This ability alone might make some of the abilities more broken, and there might be some really fun builds out there for it. But in my opinion, I think this is a pretty good archetype overall. It's very solid. It has a lot of things that you can do. Not a ton of utility, but this is a very combat dedicated archetype dedication. And it's a really good one too, I might add. And it has a very strong theme that can add to your character, obviously. So, whatever class you pick up the Chronoskimmer on, I think it would do very well. Now, obviously, charging in and striking enemies is not what casters would like to do, but being able to reset skill checks or giving your martial characters better initiatives are things I could see casters wanting to add to their character. And potentially you could be a Time Mage Chronoskimmer. Wouldn't that be an interesting mix of archetypes? That sounds like a lot of fun, actually. But with that, we're going to be done with this episode. Thank you all so much for watching. We have two archetypes, remaining in the Dark Archive before we're done. And I hope I can make it. If you cannot tell, my voice has been struggling kind of this whole time. And I've been worn a little thin by everything that's happened. We've also had 1,000 subscribers. And we're planning for 1,000 subscribers special. There's a lot going on the channel, and I just want to thank everyone who watches these videos because you made it happen. Thank you all so much. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.